I'm Reese Calder. I'm 36 years old. I run my own real estate consultancy, and until recently, I thought I knew the limits of what I could tolerate from my family. That illusion shattered the moment I opened Instagram during a layover in Denver. There it was, a beaming group photo tagged Prescott Family Reunion 2025, taken right in the garden of my house. The house my grandmother left to me when she passed, the one I restored room by room with my own hands and heart. I zoomed in, stunned. My mother was at the center, dressed to impress. My brother Jake stood beside her, wearing an apron that read Grill King. Behind them, my tulips, trampled. My stone lanterns, repurposed as drink holders. The worst part, I wasn't even invited. I sat in that airport lounge, clutching my phone, surrounded by strangers, feeling like the biggest stranger of all in my own family. No one had texted, no one had called. No one even thought to ask if they could use the house, the one they'd once resented me for inheriting. That was the moment the shift happened. Not out of rage, out of clarity. This wasn't about one party. It was about decades of erasure, entitlement, and quiet betrayal. So I went home. I looked at what was left of the space I'd once considered sacred. And then I did the one thing none of them saw coming. I sold the house. And I don't regret a thing. They used to call me Gran's little shadow when I was growing up. Other kids spent their weekends at sleepovers or playing video games. Me, I was in my grandmother's greenhouse learning how to care for orchids, or curled up in her study as she taught me how to catalog rare books. She was Irene Prescott, dignified, sharp as a tack, and deeply observant. She didn't waste words, but when she spoke, you listened, especially if you were lucky enough to be her favorite grandchild, and I was. My grandmother had raised 3 children on her own after my grandfather passed away in the early 80s. She ran her household like a quiet empire, always organized, always elegant. But while she could be strict, she had a soft spot for things that were tender books, flowers, and me. My mother, Dana, was her eldest. The two had a strained relationship, filled with tension neither of them ever admitted to. Dana constantly sought her approval, but rarely earned it. My mother often made bitter remarks, like, "Your grandmother always preferred things over people," or "She loved that house more than her own kids." My brother, Jake, is 3 years older than me, a classic charmer, all smiles, minimal effort. He coasted through life on a mix of good looks and well-timed jokes. He was the family golden boy, popular, athletic, the one everyone clapped for, even when he accomplished very little. Jake was the kind of person who believed the world owed him something just for showing up. Me, I was the responsible one. Quiet, methodical. I color-coded my binders in high school and organized the family spice rack alphabetically for fun. While Jake was out charming relatives for extra dessert, I was in the kitchen helping Grandma do the dishes. But Grandma never made me feel small for being different. She used to say, "Reese, some people talk and others build. You're a builder." She gave me my first real gift of ownership when I turned 12 keys to her greenhouse, along with a dusty notebook where she logged her planting methods and bloom cycles. "It's yours now," she said. I took care of that greenhouse like it was sacred, because to me, I studied urban development and historic preservation in college. My passion for real estate wasn't about profit. It was about stories, heritage, and what homes meant to the people who lived in them. By the time I was 30, I had founded a boutique real estate firm focused on restoring historical properties. My grandmother was the first person to toast my launch with sparkling cider and homemade lemon bars in her sunroom. "You're a modern steward of old souls," she told me. I still remember the warmth in her eyes when she said it. When she passed away 3 years ago, I felt hollow. It wasn't just grief, it was dread, because I knew what was coming, the will. Despite all the unspoken jealousy and backhanded comments from my family, Grandma made her intentions clear. She left the Queen Anne Victorian she'd lived in for nearly half a century entirely to me. Not shared, not split in thirds, no confusing conditions, just a short, handwritten note to Reese Calder, who sees this house not as a possession but as a promise. Carry it forward. The backlash from my mother and Jake was immediate and venomous. She must have been confused at the end. My mother insisted. Probably not in her right mind. Jake was more direct. Come on, you already own your own place. You don't even have kids. What do you need a whole house for? But I wasn't surprised. Disappointed, sure, but not surprised. That's how entitlement works. It's invisible to the people who wear it. Legally, there was nothing they could do. The will had been properly drafted with witnesses and notarization. In fact, Grandma had emailed me a copy of the document 6 months before she died, just in case there were questions. Still, I tried to be generous. I invited them both to the reading. I told my mother she could take whatever heirloom she wanted: jewelry, porcelain, some of the older family photographs. I even offered to help Jake cover a deposit on a new apartment after yet another failed business venture. But nothing I did was ever enough because none of it was the house. And that house, it was more than floorboards and furniture to me. It was sacred. I moved in 3 weeks after the funeral, not just to inhabit it, but to honor it. Honor. Every scratch in the hardwood, every stain in the banister had a story. I sanded floors by hand, restored the stained glass windows that faced east, and reupholstered chairs using fabric Grandma had ordered from a shop in Vermont in 1976. I kept her tea kettle, her cardigans, even her worn gardening gloves, tucked in a drawer near the back porch. But I didn't just preserve, I also expanded. I turned the attic into my own creative space, a sunlit studio with sketches pinned to corkboards and dried lavender hanging from beams. I opened up the dining room for monthly housing workshops, empowering local women to navigate the buying process in a system that so often excluded them. In every inch of that house, I saw her. In every decision I made, I felt her guidance. I didn't just live there, I belonged there. Which is why what they did, what came next, shook me to my core. They didn't just use the house. They acted like it had never been mine to begin with. It started with a photo. I was at the Denver International Airport, waiting to board my connecting flight back from a housing innovation conference in California. I'd just wrapped a panel on sustainable preservation, a topic my grandmother would have adored, and was feeling good, tired, but proud. I ordered a tea, settled into a lounge chair near Gate B37, and mindlessly scrolled through Instagram. That's when it hit me. The photo wasn't tagged to me. I hadn't been mentioned, invited, or even alerted. But there it was, posted by a second cousin I barely knew, one of those relatives who shows up at funerals and baby showers, smiles too wide, and disappears for years. The caption read, "Prescott Family Reunion 2025, grateful for the roots that raised us." In the background, my house, not just the front porch or a generic angle. It was the side garden, the one I'd planted with tulips and foxglove in a spiral pattern based on my grandmother's old landscaping sketches. The one I watered every morning and raked free of leaves every fall by hand. That garden was in bloom, beautiful, and absolutely full of people I hadn't seen in years. I blinked, scrolled to the next photo. There was my mother, Dana, standing proudly in the doorway of the sunroom, wearing pearls and a flowy dress I'd never seen. Next to her was Jake, holding a spatula and grinning in front of a large outdoor grill I didn't own. In fact, I recognized very little of what I saw: rented party tables, folding chairs scattered across the lawn, a long buffet stretching down the patio, balloons taped to the pergola I'd built with my own hands. It was all mine. And somehow, they'd taken it, without asking, without telling me, without me. I sat motionless for a few seconds, the noise of the airport muffled by the pounding in my ears. Surely there had been a mistake. Maybe it was an old photo. Maybe they'd just borrowed the outside. But no, the next video showed my foyer, now decorated with streamers and a chalkboard sign that read, "Welcome home, Prescott Clan." There were trays of catered food lined up on the antique entry table. Someone had set up a photo booth against my grandmother's portrait wall. I was shaking. My fingers fumbled to refresh the post, hoping maybe, absurdly, it would vanish or reveal itself to be from someone else's home. But no, it was real. There was no text from my mother, no missed call from Jake. I checked my calendar, my email, even the old family Facebook group that I'd muted years ago. Nothing. I'd been erased. Deliberately. When I called my best friend Kira, I barely got the words out. "They're in the house." I said, "My house." "They threw a party and didn't even tell me." Her voice dropped. "What? Who?" "My mother, Jake. Everyone. They're calling it a family reunion." Kira didn't ask if I was sure. She knew better. "I'm flying back now." I told her, "I land in 3 hours. Want me to pick you up?" "No, I need to see it for myself." The flight home was the longest of my life. I didn't read. I didn't work. I didn't sleep. I stared at the seat back in front of me and tried not to cry. Memories flooded in every time I'd tried to involve them in this place. The Thanksgiving dinner where they'd shown up 2 hours late and complained about the turkey being dry. The open invitation I'd extended for Sunday brunch, which they never once accepted. The birthday I spent alone in the garden with only a bottle of wine and my grandmother's journal for company. They never wanted to be there when I invited them, but now they'd claimed it as their own. As the plane touched down and I grabbed my bag, my hands were still trembling. I took a deep breath, trying to prepare myself. Maybe it would be winding down. Maybe I could speak to them calmly. Maybe. The rideshare pulled it up to my block just after 6 p.m., and it looked like a wedding was in full swing. Cars lined both sides of the street. Music thumped through the air. Laughter spilled out into the neighborhood. My garden, my carefully manicured, tulip-lined garden, was now a smoking area for guests with red Solo cups and plates balanced on their laps. I froze. The driver glanced back. "Some party," he said casually, unloading my suitcase onto the curb. "Yeah," I said flatly. "Some party." I wheeled my luggage past 2 strangers who smiled at me as if I were an uninvited guest. I could see into the kitchen through the open side window. My mother was laughing with 2 women I didn't recognize, handing out what looked like commemorative Prescott family t-shirts. Inside, in the kitchen that still smelled like my grandmother's lavender hand soap. I reached the front porch. My vintage rocking chair had been pushed into a corner to make room for a sign-in table. A whiteboard listed the day's events: lawn games, barbecue, photo hour, karaoke. I stepped through the door. The smell hit first: food, perfume, alcohol, and far too many bodies. Then the noise. My foyer, normally filled with calm light and polished wood, was now chaos. My rug was covered in dirt. A child ran past me shrieking, nearly knocking over a tray of cupcakes. No one looked twice at me. No one stopped to ask what I was doing there, because of course I wasn't expected. I wandered into the living room, numb. My antique secretary desk had been shoved against the wall to make room for folding chairs. My grandmother's record player was spinning something loud and distorted, completely wrong for the mood of the room. In the dining area, I found Jake wearing an apron that said "Reunion Grillmaster," beer in hand, laughing with cousins I hadn't seen since college. He turned, saw me, and his smile faltered. "Oh, hey," he said, as if I were an old neighbor dropping by unannounced. "You're back early. I wasn't invited," I replied quietly. He shrugged. "Mom had the spare key. We figured you'd be gone all weekend." I couldn't speak. Not yet. My mother appeared behind him moments later, cheeks flushed, holding a wine glass. She took one look at me and said, "Well, this is awkward." That's when something inside me cracked. Not in an explosive way, no yelling, no breaking plates, just a cold, quiet shift, like a door slamming shut deep inside my chest. They didn't see me. Not really. They never had. I turned and walked upstairs to the attic studio, my sanctuary, and when I opened the door and saw someone's coat dumped on my drafting table, and a child's juice box leaking onto my floor, that's when the decision was made. I was going to sell the house, not to punish them, but to finally choose myself. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't. Even after leaving the house, even after shutting the hotel room door behind me, the images kept flooding back. My dining room packed with strangers. My grandmother's desk shoved aside to hold cocktail glasses. My attic, my sanctuary, desecrated by juice boxes and coats. I sat on the edge of a stiff Marriott mattress, staring at the sterile wallpaper and dim glow of a charging lamp, wondering what I had done wrong to make them think this was okay. But by sunrise, shame had faded into resolve. I needed to see the full picture. So, at 8:45 a.m. the next morning, I returned. I expected hangovers, maybe a few stragglers still lingering over coffee. But what I found was worse than anything I had imagined. The house was abandoned not emotionally, like the day before, but physically. Everyone had cleared out, and they'd left everything in shambles. The front door was still unlocked, the whiteboard sign-in list flapping in the breeze. The foyer rug was destroyed, crusted over with what I hoped was spilled wine and not something worse. My entry console had a cracked leg, the mirror above it, an heirloom from my grandmother's wedding, had a hairline fracture snaking across the bottom corner. In the living room, folding chairs were stacked haphazardly against my refinished wall. Scratches marred the wood floor where they'd been dragged back and forth. Someone had set a plate of ribs on the piano bench. The grease had soaked through the fabric and into the wood. I took out my phone and started documenting everything. Photo after photo. Every stain. Every cigarette burn. Every overturned planter in the garden. The kitchen was worse. My pantry had been ransacked. Someone had used my copper pans, the ones my grandmother brought back from Provence, and left them in the sink, caked in blackened residue. A casserole dish had cracked from direct flame. In the study, I found what made me physically sick. My grandmother's desk, the heart of the house, the place where she'd written in her journals, where we used to sit and plan our futures together, had a fresh gash across its surface. A deep scratch, like someone had dragged a belt buckle or a sharp key across it. There was also a burn mark circular, the size of a cigarette base, right next to her inkwell. I had a strict no-smoking rule in the house. Not that it mattered to them. I stood there, just breathing, trying to keep from crying. But when I opened the bottom drawer of the desk and found my grandmother's leather-bound will folder stuffed behind an empty soda can, I sat down on the floor and wept. That wasn't an accident. That was disregard. And then came the sound of footsteps. I turned, wiping my eyes quickly, to see Jake entering from the hallway, still in the clothes from last night, holding a cup of coffee like it was a shield. "Morning," he muttered. I didn't say anything. He looked around, clearly seeing the mess for the first time. "We were gonna get cleaners. Mom scheduled someone for noon." I stood up slowly. "You threw a party in my house. Didn't tell me. Invited 80 people. You left it like this." He shrugged. "It was just a gathering. You're blowing it out of proportion. You let strangers use my bedroom as a coat check. You let kids run through my studio. That's not just inconsiderate. Jake, that's invasive." He laughed uncomfortably. "It's not like we trashed the place on purpose." "No," I said. "You just didn't care." Dana entered the kitchen as if on cue, brushing toast crumbs from her blouse. "Oh, Reese, you're back. We figured you were at that hotel all night." I stared at her, speechless. She sounded like we'd bumped into each other at the grocery store. She poured herself more coffee and gave me a bright, too familiar smile. The party was a hit. Everyone loved the house. We had folks asking if we'd host next year's reunion, too. My throat went dry. You're not hosting anything here again? She blinked. Excuse me, this isn't a community center. It's my home. The home Grandma left to me. Specifically because she knew you and Jake wouldn't treat it with respect. Her face darkened. Don't bring your grandmother into this. She's the reason we're standing in this kitchen. Dana set her mug down slowly. You're being emotional. I get it. But this house isn't just yours. It's part of our family. No, I said firmly. It was. And now, it's my responsibility. And I've decided I'm done trying to convince people to respect something they don't value. Jake raised an eyebrow. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm selling the house. Silence. Then my mother laughed, short and sharp. Don't be ridiculous. I already called Jude Whitman. He's coming by tomorrow to walk through the property. He's had buyers asking about this place for months. You're making a scene, she said through clenched teeth. I shook my head. No, I'm finally cleaning one up. She took a step closer, dropping her voice. You're not thinking clearly. You're hurt. But selling this house, that's extreme. Not as extreme as breaking into it, throwing a party, and trashing everything that meant something to me. Jake stepped forward. What about the family? The memories, Grandma's legacy. I looked at him, eyes burning. You don't honor someone's legacy by ignoring their wishes. You honor it by protecting what they built. Neither of them responded. I walked to the study, picked up the scratched folder, and clutched it to my chest. This was a gift, and I treated it as one. You treated it like a free Airbnb with heirlooms. Dana stiffened. If you go through with this, Reese, we won't forgive you. You've never truly seen me as part of this family, I said, turning back. So, what exactly am I losing? Jude Whitman showed up at exactly 900 mm. The next morning, he was one of those real estate agents who could walk into any room and instantly size it up square footage. Natural light, resale potential, and emotional baggage. I'd worked with him before on restoration projects. And while we weren't friends, he knew my style and respected my boundaries. That was enough. When he saw the state of the house, he didn't gasp or overreact. He simply let out a low whistle and said, Well, this is different than the last time I visited. We walked through the foyer first. He made a few notes on his tablet, examining the scratched floorboards, the damaged mirror, the clutter still left behind. Looks like someone hosted a full-blown wedding reception in here, he said dryly. Family reunion? I replied, but yeah, same chaos, no bride. Though, just betrayal. He glanced at me, his expression shifting to something softer. You sure you're ready to let this go? I'm sure, I said. And I was. The night in the hotel had hardened something in me, or maybe just burned away the last fragile remnants of obligation. This house meant something. But they've turned it into a symbol of everything I've tried to move past. He nodded, understanding more than he let on. I've got 2 interested buyers. One in particular, a developer with a preservation focus. He's been looking for something just like this in this zip code. Cash buyer. No contingencies. Fast close. Perfect, I said. I don't want this to drag out. We toured the rest of the house. He took photos of the attic, the sunroom, the garden now trampled and faded from the foot traffic. When we passed the study, he paused by the damaged desk. American Empire, he asked. 1830. I nodded. My grandmother's pride and joy. He crouched to examine the burn mark. That'll be tough to restore, but not impossible. If the buyer cares, I'll pass along a few restoration contacts. We sat down at the back patio table, the only area still relatively untouched. I watched a breeze roll through the hedges as Jude opened his folio. "Let's talk numbers," he said. "Given the location, size, condition, and the fact you're offering as is, I'd suggest listing it at $215 million. But if you want to move quickly, I'd go straight to your highest buyer with a private offer of 2.1. No inspection, no haggle I asked, no financing delay." He added, "Clean and fast." I nodded. "Let's do it. Make the call." As Jude started drafting the paperwork, I finally exhaled. It was happening. The decision wasn't a concept anymore. It was action. At that moment, Dana stepped out onto the patio. She was still in her robe, mascara smudged beneath her eyes like she'd been crying or trying to make it seem that way. I braced myself. "I saw his car," she said, voice flat. "Are you really doing this?" Jude looked up, then at me. "Would you like privacy?" "No," I said. "She can hear it. It's happening either way." Dana turned her attention to me. "So you're just selling our family home like it's nothing?" "It's not your family home. Grandma left it to me. And I've spent the last 3 years preserving it until you and Jake violated every boundary I ever set. You're punishing us." "No," I said. "I'm protecting myself. That's what Grandma would have wanted." She scoffed. She wanted this house to be full of family. She wanted it respected. I snapped. "And you used it without asking. Threw a party, destroyed her desk, tossed her dishes in the sink like they were paper plates." Dana's expression twisted. "We cleaned up. Not well enough," Jude muttered under his breath as he signed the seller agreement. "I thought we were past this," she continued, growing more desperate. "I thought we were reconnecting." I stared at her. "You haven't asked me a single question about my work, my life, my business in over a year. You only came into this house when it suited you, when it gave you status. You don't want me—" "Mom, you want what I own." Jude stood. "I'll leave you two for a moment. I'll send the papers for electronic signature within the hour." After he stepped inside, Dana sat down heavily across from me. "I was proud of you. You know, even if I didn't say it, I told my friends about your business, about how smart you were. Did you tell them you broke into my house while I was away?" She flinched. I leaned forward. "Do you even know what you did wrong? Not just morally, but personally. Do you know how it felt to find out through a stranger's Instagram post that my house had been filled with 80 people without so much as a text from you? I didn't think it would matter," she said softly. And there it was. The truth. The old root beneath everything rotten. They didn't think I mattered. Not enough to include, not enough to ask, not enough to respect. I stood, calm now. "I hope you find a new place. I'm giving you and Jake until Friday to clear out your things. After that, the locks will be changed." "Reese, don't do this," she begged. "We're family." I looked her in the eye. "Family doesn't mean ownership. It means respect. And you've run out of chances." Jake showed up later that afternoon, just as I was going through the closets to catalog what items I'd be moving and what would be donated or discarded. I didn't even hear him come in. He just appeared in the doorway of the upstairs hall like some ghost of entitlement. Arms folded, expression sour. "You're really going through with it?" he asked. I didn't look up from the stack of old linens I was folding. "Yes." He leaned against the doorframe. "You know, I've been talking to a lawyer. If this goes to court, we might have a case." Now I looked at him. "You're bluffing," I said. "Maybe," he said, grinning, "but maybe not. Grandma was old when she wrote that will. People might say she was confused. You don't think it's strange she left it to just you? I mean, we're all family. You mean you feel entitled to something you didn't earn?" I replied. stepping past him and placing the linens in a box. "And you're not going to intimidate me." Jake's grin faded. "I'm just saying, a lot of people would agree this house should stay in the family." I turned to face him fully. This house stayed in the family. I'm family. I'm the one who showed up every Sunday. I'm the one who listened to Grandma talk about her plans for every room. I'm the one who sanded these banisters, repainted these walls, replanted her garden from her journals. You didn't want this house until you realized you could throw a party in it. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. And by the way, the deadline to contest the will expired over 2 years ago. So go ahead, talk to a lawyer, but make sure they explain that to you. He blinked. "Oh," I added, "and I had her capacity documented before she signed the will. A full legal and medical assessment, so unless you've got a time machine, you're wasting your breath." He looked furious now. The bluster had evaporated. All that was left was a man standing in a house he never valued, facing the fact that someone else had already made the grown-up decisions. "You're going to regret this," he said quietly. I walked away. By the following day, I had my lawyer on the line. Diane Matthews had helped me set up my estate plan the year before, a precise, intelligent woman who never overpromised. I trusted her judgment completely. We sat in the back garden with laptops open, her paralegal cross-checking the sale documentation while Diane reviewed the title and deed transfer protocols. "They may try to interfere," I said. "My brother and my mother. I want everything legally airtight." She nodded. "So far, everything's clean. There's no encumbrance on the title, no contesting action filed, and the property is in your name alone. But I'll add a clause to the closing agreement in case they try to obstruct access during the walkthrough." "Thank you," I said. "I just need this to go fast." "Speed and precision don't always go hand in hand," she said gently. "In this case, they will." I said, "Because I need to be out of this house before I start resenting the parts of it that were beautiful." The buyer, a man named Colin Reyes, arrived 2 days later for a private showing. Jude had briefed me on him, a mid-40s preservationist and small-scale developer who specialized in restoring historical homes for personal use, not commercial conversion. He walked the property slowly, with an architect's eye, taking notes on the woodwork and windows, asking questions about insulation and permits. When we reached the study, he stopped at the desk. "American Empire," he asked, running his fingers lightly over the gouged edge. "1830s, I said, "My grandmother's favorite." He looked up. "Will you be taking it with you?" I hesitated. "It's too damaged. And honestly, too painful now." He nodded. Thoughtful. "I know someone who can restore this. Would it be all right if I kept it and brought it back to life?" Something in my chest loosened. "Yes," I said. "That would mean a lot." We walked through the rest of the house, finishing in the kitchen. "I'd like to make an offer," he said. "Full price? Cash? As is?" Jude looked at me. I nodded. "We accept." Word spread faster than I thought. By the end of the week, my mother had left 4 voicemails. The first was angry, the second was pleading, the third was performatively weepy, the fourth was cold silence, 10 seconds of background noise, like she wanted me to hear what I was missing. I didn't return any of them. I needed peace, not performance. Jake texted once, "Nice to know you care more about strangers than your own family." I didn't reply to that either. It was strange, not the silence, but the calm that followed it. I thought I'd feel guilt, loss, the ache of burning bridges. But instead, I felt something else, lightness, like I'd been carrying a backpack full of rocks for years and only just now realized I could set it down. By the time the closing day arrived, everything was in place. The paperwork had been reviewed 3 times over, the title cleared, the funds wired and waiting. I walked through the house one last time that morning, alone. Every step echoed with memory. Every doorway held the shape of a moment I hadn't realized I was holding on to. The upstairs hallway, where Grandma once braided my hair and told me I'd be stronger than everyone expected. The pantry where I'd sneak lemon cookies before dinner. The attic studio sunlight streaming in, now empty but still glowing. I didn't cry. Instead, I whispered, "Thank you," and walked out the front door. Diane met me in the dining room at 2:00 p.m. sharp. Jude arrived moments later. The buyer came with his assistant and a pen in hand. As we signed the final documents, the front door opened. Dana and Jake walked in, uninvited, unannounced. Just like the reunion, Jake looked furious. Dana looked desperate. "This isn't over," Jake muttered under his breath. "Oh, it is," Diane said calmly. "And you're trespassing." Dana tried one last time. "Reese, please, don't do this. We can fix this. We're family." I didn't even flinch. "No," I said. "We're related, but we haven't been family in a long time." And with that, I signed the deed. As my pen left the paper, the room fell silent. The deal was done. The house, my grandmother's house, my sanctuary, the battleground of my family's entitlement, now officially belonged to someone else. Across the table, Colin Reyes offered a small, respectful nod. Jude beamed, already mentally calculating his commission. Diane handed the signed documents to the assistant, her expression cool and professional. But my eyes didn't move from the two people standing in the doorway, my mother and Jake. They looked stunned. Not because of the paperwork. That part was clear from the moment they barged in and saw the closing documents on the table. They were stunned because I had actually done it. Because I hadn't flinched. Dana was the first to speak. "Reese, we need to talk. Please, just 5 minutes." Colin stood to excuse himself, but I raised a hand. "No. Stay. Anything they say, they can say in front of witnesses." Jake's face darkened. "You planned this. You timed it so we couldn't stop you." "I planned this," I said calmly, "because I'm tired of playing defense in my own life. You're throwing us out." He accused. "No," I corrected. "You invited yourselves in. You disrespected every boundary I had. You turned my home into a free-for-all and then got angry when I responded." My mother stepped forward. Her voice wavered, half performance, half genuine panic. "You're making a permanent decision out of hurt. I know we messed up, but this is irreversible. I know." I said, "Then why not pause? Give it a week. Let things settle. We're still your family. You're right." I said, "This is irreversible. And that's why I waited. I didn't do this in the heat of the moment. I waited until I had clarity, and now that I do, I'm not interested in negotiations." Jake scoffed. "You always think you're better than us, with your fancy job and your boundaries. Newsflash, you're not." Diane spoke up then, her tone surgical. "Mr. Calder, you're on private property and not a party to this legal transaction. Unless you have a formal objection recognized by the court, I'll have to ask you to leave." He ignored her. "You're destroying what little family we have left." I turned to face him fully. "No, Jake, you destroyed it. You and Mom, when you decided I was only valuable if I stayed quiet, gave money, or played host to whatever you wanted, you didn't include me out of love. You only remembered I existed when you wanted something from me." Dana's voice cracked. "That's not true." "It is," I said. "And if you ever took 2 seconds to really see me, you'd know that." I turned to Colin, signaling it was okay to begin the wrap-up. His assistant handed him the final envelope with the wire instructions. Jude was already texting the title company. But Dana wasn't finished. "Please," she said again, barely above a whisper. "Reese, don't do this. We can change." Her eyes were glassy. Her hands trembled, and for the first time she looked small, not manipulative, not calculating, just lost. You've had years, I said softly. Years of me reaching out. Years of me offering connection, only to be met with indifference or guilt trips. She said nothing, I added. The last time we had lunch, you spent the entire meal talking about Jake's new idea for a juice bar, never asked me a single question about my business. Or my life. You knew I was renovating a historic landmark in Portland and didn't ask once. That wasn't an oversight. Mom, that was a choice. Jake's jaw clenched. You're just bitter, selfish, ungrateful. No, I said, I'm finally being honest. You call it selfish because you're used to me not having limits. Dana's voice broke. I don't know how to fix this. You can't, I said, not cruelly, but clearly. Because this isn't a fix. It's a release. Diane stepped in again. The property is now under new ownership. You need to vacate the premises immediately. Jake stormed out, muttering something about lawyers and legacy. Dana hesitated, her eyes scanning the room, the woodwork, the chandelier, the table where she used to sit with Grandma and complain about how hard her life was. Maybe she thought she'd always come back here, that no matter what she did, I'd keep the door open. Not anymore. I wish you well, I said quietly. Truly. But I'm done bleeding to keep other people comfortable. She didn't respond. She turned, slowly, and walked out the front door. Colin signed the final page and handed me a copy of the deed. Congratulations, he said with a gentle smile. And, thank you. I'll take good care of it. I nodded. That's all I needed to hear. That night, I sat in the hotel room with the signed deed in my hand and my phone buzzing nonstop on the nightstand. Voicemails from extended family, angry Facebook messages, one text from my Aunt Karen that read, Your grandmother would be ashamed, but she wouldn't have been. I knew that, because my grandmother was the one who told me never to let guilt dress itself up as duty. I played one voicemail from Kira, the only person whose voice I wanted to hear. You did it, she said. You actually did it. You stood your ground. I'm so proud of you. Let me know when you want to celebrate. Champagne's chilling. I smiled, not because it was over, but because it was mine now. My choice. My chapter. The next morning, I woke up lighter, not happy, not yet, but unburdened. I walked down to the cafe next to the hotel and ordered breakfast. I opened my laptop and made a list not of regrets, but of next steps. New place to live, new project to start, new boundaries to hold, and a new kind of peace to protect, the kind that comes from knowing you no longer owe anyone your silence, your space, or yourself. The silence that followed the sale was the kind that doesn't come naturally. It was curated, deliberate, protected like a garden I was learning to tend for the first time. For the first few weeks, I didn't go back to the old neighborhood. I avoided the block, unsubscribed from family threads, and muted anyone who posted about preserving tradition or staying united, which, in my family's case, was code for keep pretending everything's fine while someone else cleans up the mess. I moved into a small rental apartment on the edge of town, a 2-bedroom walk-up with creaky floors and terrible water pressure, but it was mine. It didn't carry ghosts or guilt. I kept the decor simple, neutral walls, clean lines, sunlight. The only remnants of my grandmother's house I brought with me were a brass reading lamp, a box of handwritten letters she sent me during college, and her garden journal. The desk stayed with the house. It belonged to that place. But her spirit, that quiet insistence on dignity and strength, traveled with me. Kira visited the new apartment 2 days after I moved in. She brought takeout, wine, and zero judgment, just the way I liked it. We sat on the floor eating lo mein out of cartons, her back propped against a half-unpacked box labeled Misc Books and Regrets. So, she said, raising an eyebrow, how does it feel to be the family villain? I laughed. A real one this time. Oddly empowering. She raised her wine glass. to being the villain in someone else's story while finally being the hero in your own. We clinked glasses, and for the first time in months, I felt full not just from food, but from relief. The messages from extended family trickled in for a while longer. Most were passive-aggressive, some outright hostile. Can't believe you'd sell the family home over a misunderstanding. I always knew you were difficult. Your grandmother must be rolling in her grave. But there were a few quiet exceptions, like my cousin Rachel, a second cousin on my mom's side I hadn't spoken to in years, who messaged me on LinkedIn. Of all places, I just wanted to say, I heard what happened. And I believe you. Grandma Prescott once told me you were the only person in the family who ever really listened to her. I think you did the right thing. It wasn't much, but it meant something. Sometimes it only takes one voice in the dark to remind you you're not crazy. The weeks turned into a month, and a rhythm returned. I threw myself into work. My company had just been contracted to consult on a heritage restoration project downtown, an old brick library being converted into a community arts center. I led the team walkthroughs, traced the original blueprints, and handpicked the contractors myself. Each brick I preserved felt like a reclamation. Every peeling mural we restored felt like proof letting go of the past doesn't mean erasing it. Sometimes it just means putting it where it belongs in history, not in your living room. I started going to therapy more regularly. Kira had been nudging me for years. Now I walked into the therapist's office and said, I don't want to explain what they did. I want to stop explaining why I tolerated it. That became my thesis, my practice, every week. I unlearned something, that love should be earned through silence, that saying no was rude, that boundaries made me cold. I journaled. I planted herbs on my tiny balcony. I read novels with complicated women and underlined all the parts that felt like freedom. Then, one night, about 2 months after the sale, I got a text I didn't expect. From my mother. It was simple. Can we talk? I stared at it for a long time. The words weren't defensive, they weren't manipulative, just uncertain. My therapist had prepared me for this moment. The test. The reach. I didn't respond right away. I gave myself space to think, to breathe, to check in with that newly planted part of me that didn't bend to guilt. The next morning, I replied, we can, but only in person, and only if you're ready to listen. She replied within minutes, we met at a cafe halfway between our apartments, neutral ground. When I arrived, she was already seated, hands wrapped around a mug like it was the only warmth she had left. She looked older, not just physically, emotionally, like the scaffolding she'd always stood on, pride, control. Expectation had finally cracked. Thank you for meeting me, she said quietly. I nodded. Why now? She took a breath. Because I realized I lost something I never appreciated. And maybe you were right to take it away. I didn't speak. I let her talk. She confessed things I didn't expect, that she'd used my inheritance as a crutch to feel powerful in a life where she felt overlooked, that she envied the closeness I had with Grandma, that she thought if she ignored the distance between us, it would go away. It didn't excuse anything, but it explained a lot. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said, but I want to try to be better. If you'll let me. I nodded slowly. Trying means listening, and accepting that I have boundaries now, real ones. She nodded back. I can do that. We didn't hug, not yet. But we paid the check together, and for once, she didn't let me cover it just because. That night, I walked back to my apartment, the air crisp and filled with the first hints of spring. I stood on my little balcony, watering the thyme and rosemary plants I'd started from seed, and thought about my grandmother. She'd once told me, the strongest roots don't shout. They hold you steady when the storm comes. I used to think she was talking about tradition, about bloodlines and duty, Now I understood. She was talking about integrity, about the kind of strength that doesn't require anyone's permission to exist. And for the first time, I wasn't angry. I wasn't grieving. I was growing. 3 months after the sale, I stood outside the old house one final time. Colin had invited me to the housewarming party, a small, elegant gathering to celebrate the completion of initial restorations. I almost declined. I thought returning would reopen wounds, bring the ghosts back. But curiosity won out. Or maybe closure did. When I pulled up, the house looked the same from the outside. The garden was trimmed, the shutters freshly painted. But the soul of the place, the quiet pride of Grandma's craftsmanship, still radiated through the bricks. Inside, things had changed. Colin had restored the woodwork to a satin sheen, the chandelier sparkled, and the study. The desk stood once more fully repaired, glowing under the light of a restored lamp. I found a restorer in Oregon who specializes in early American Empire pieces. Colin told me. Took weeks, but worth every second. I ran my fingers along the smooth grain. It felt like touching the past, but this time, without pain. He handed me a small box. These were in the attic. I figured they belonged to you. Inside were some of my grandmother's postcards, a few of her sewing tools, and a tiny music box I thought had been lost. Thank you, I said, for everything. He smiled. You honored the house. Now it gets to honor you back. I stayed for less than an hour, long enough to see what it had become, long enough to know I'd made the right choice. As I left, I didn't look back. Not because I was afraid, but because I didn't need to anymore. A few weeks later, I received a letter in the mail. From Jake. Not a text, not an email, a real handwritten letter, shaky. A little angry at first, but honest. Reese, I've been thinking about everything that happened. I won't lie, I was mad. Still am, some days. But I'm starting to see how blind I was. You did everything Grandma asked. You protected what mattered, and I didn't. I don't expect us to be close again, but I do want you to know I get it now. I'm sorry for how I acted. And I hope someday we can be better. Jake, I read it 3 times. No manipulation, no blaming, just truth. I didn't reply right away, not because I didn't want to, but because I wanted the words to come from a place as real as his. When I finally responded, I wrote Jake, thank you for your letter. It meant more than you probably know. I don't know what the future holds for us, but I'm open to small steps. What matters most to me now is honesty. And it sounds like you're starting to walk that path. Let's take it one conversation at a time. Reese spring turned into summer. My balcony garden thrived. The community center project I led reached its final phase, and the team surprised me with a plaque in the lobby for Reese Calder. A builder of foundations, in places and people. I cried in front of everyone. It was embarrassing and beautiful. Kira joked that I was turning into a softie with steel bones. I told her that was the nicest thing anyone had ever called me. Then came the invitation. A local nonprofit one that provided transitional housing for young women aging out of the foster system reached out about using my consulting services. They wanted to convert an old boarding house into supportive, long-term living space. The building needed major work, and funding, and time. But I knew the moment I walked through it, this was my next legacy. Not a house full of antique furniture, but a home full of second chances. I signed on without hesitation. On a quiet Sunday morning, as I sipped tea on my balcony, I pulled out my grandmother's garden journal. The leather was worn, the ink faded, but her notes still danced across the pages. One passage stood out. What you plant is never just for you. It's for the ones who come after. Legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you grow while you're still here. That day, I started a new notebook. not to document the past, but to shape the future. I called it the blueprint, a plan for the women I would help, the homes we would build, and the boundaries I would never again allow to be crossed. Because legacy, I'd learned, wasn't about keeping a house in the family. It was about becoming the kind of person who knows when to hold on and when to let go.